axis and missile defense axis around Korea. If North Korean WMD attack is imminent, then the United States may carry out preemptive strike on North Korea's WMD, and the United States would increase the combat readiness to launch nuclear attack. At the final stage, if North Korea actually carries out WMD attack, then both countries may take firm actions, including nuclear retaliations. This is the outline of the tailored extended deterrence here in Korea. So let's move to the second topic, the implication of North Korean nuclear progress to this extended deterrence. So I'm not going to go over this North Korean nuclear capability, the progress of North Korea's nuclear capability, but please keep in mind, it is the official statement from North Korean Foreign Ministry, last July. And the North Korean Foreign Ministry claimed United States, the entire United States mainland is within the fire range of DPRK's missile, and DPRK has the capability to carry out surprise attack with ICBMs at any time, any place, and any location. And also, please keep in mind, North Korea already has nuclear, the capabilities, military nuclear capabilities. North Korea already has the strategic forces, and if you check the history of the strategic forces, probably you could go back to around up to 1999, and then probably between 1999 and 2012, North Korea already had some nuclear military unit called strategic rocket forces, and then it transformed into strategic forces. And also, I found quite interesting interplay between North Korean capabilities, nuclear capabilities, and North Korean rhetoric. Before North Korea had any nuclear weapons, and North Korea claimed nuclear weapons is meaningless, and ideological commitment should be treated as the treasure sword handling all issues. After North Korea claimed to have crude nuclear weapons in 2005, and at the time, North Korea might not have some reliable delivery system yet. At the time, North Korea framed nuclear weapons as an instrument of deterrence and peace. And after North Korea launches the satellite, and then North Korea got the strategic rocket forces, and North Korea kept focusing on deterrence, but there was some hint of a preemptive strike. At the time, North Korea started to describe nuclear weapons as all-purpose treasure sword. And finally, after North Korea got nuclear weapons, ICBMs, and North Korea claimed that the United States does not monopolize the preemptive strike capabilities, and the United States' whole mainland is within the DPRK's firing range. So if you check the North Korean rhetoric, you're going to see some involvement from the North Korean side when North Korea progress its capabilities. So what is the implication of this North Korean nuclear capabilities to the U.S. extended deterrence? Well, the answer is very simple. So there are two components in the credibility of the extended deterrence, and first is punishment capabilities. So in terms of United States punishment capabilities, I think there is not much change, but in terms of U.S. willingness to carry out extended deterrence, this North Korean nuclear capabilities bring some negative impact in this part. Because when you have strong willingness to carry out nuclear attack, nuclear retaliation for your plan, then you may have to accept the probability, the risk that the enemy may attack you. So, Dr. Cheon already mentioned the sacrifice of New York or LA for Duyeon and Seoul. So whether the United States are willing to accept this kind of suffering is a big component in the credibility of the extended deterrence. Unfortunately, as North Korea has some ICBM capability, the willingness component, unfortunately, will decrease. So when North Korea has some kind of ICBM capability, and North Korea involving in the nuclear rivalry with the United States.
You have 3 minutes despite the Star Wars.
Okay. Okay. It is like Star Wars. So Star Wars, it is the essence of a modern Marvels, but the outcome, the eventual outcome is decided by the primitive of the duels. I mean, when it comes to extended deterrence, it's not a matter of the capability any longer. It's a matter of the willingness part. You are God, or your willingness to suffering, accept the suffering, these things. There are several ways to increase the credibility of the extended deterrence. And unfortunately, I do not have enough time, so I'm going to skip this one. Thank you.
Thank you. You can come back to explain those last 2 slides in the Q&A, and may the deterrence force be with you. Ms. Kim.
First, I'd like to thank Professor Lee Man-Tong and Kai-Euston Kainak for this excellent program. It's also a refreshing break for me to take a little bit of a break from all the North Korea work that I've been doing in light of recent North Korean and Trumpian shenanigans. But hearing Dr. Cheon and Professor Cheon's presentations, I'm itching to get back into the North Korea debate, but I shall practice restraint and stick to discussing South Korea's nuclear phase-out and its implications for the global nuclear energy market and the global non-proliferation regime. Here in South Korea, nuclear zero is the buzzword these days in mainstream media and the public discourse. And it's actually what we call Konglish. It's the fusion of Korean and English words. In Korean, they call it 핵 제로, 핵 meaning nuclear in English, and 제로 meaning zero in English, so thus nuclear zero. But it has taken on a very different meaning here, very different than what we are used to in the non-proliferation world. When we talk about nuclear zero, we're talking about nuclear weapons. Here in South Korea, they're talking about nuclear energy zero, getting to zero on nuclear energy, because of the new Moon Jae-in administration. I will base my presentation on the premise, the hypothetical premise, that President Moon's nuclear phase-out plans are politically sustainable across changing administrations. I'm personally skeptical that it would be sustainable because the South Korean administration changes every 5 years, but I will pretend that we are living under an ironclad plan for phase-out and discuss what the world would look like under this scenario. There has been a lot of panic, especially relayed through the media, with President Moon's phase-out plans and announcements. But I think for about 60 years, I think the South Korean nuclear establishment is pretty much safe. It's not like people will be losing jobs tomorrow. However, if we do look at the point of 2079 and beyond, or I guess maybe a little bit before 2079, it creates a very interesting picture and something for South Korean policymakers to think about very seriously. And what's interesting is that Seoul, the Moon administration seems to believe that it can keep up with exports and retain its status as a major nuclear supplier despite its domestic phase-out plans. But I would actually raise some skepticism here. I suspect that South Korea's prospects globally will be hurt, severely hurt, with this domestic phase-out plan. If South Korea does not build new nuclear power plants, combined with the uncertainty in the future of nuclear energy, this would hurt South Korea's competitiveness on the international stage because buyers, newcomers, countries wanting to expand or build a domestic nuclear power program in their countries would likely turn to suppliers, turn to countries that have their own growing domestic nuclear energy programs. So if there is a shutdown in old nuclear power plants, and if South Korea does not continue to build new nuclear power plants, we can expect to see a decline in South Korea's manufacturing capability, and also a decline in its ability to train and attract new talent to the field. So overall, as I mentioned before, South Korea's ability to compete internationally would be hurt. Other countries would likely turn to countries like Russia and China, which will have a competitive advantage over South Korea, but this would lead to a host of non-proliferation concerns if that's the case, which I will discuss in a little bit. Although one caveat here is recently South Korea will still need to regain, with or without the phase out, currently South Korea still needs to regain international public trust in its safety standards because of reported news about its subpar safety standards with fake parts, certificates, and subpar or deficient construction in its reactor containment liners and some of its reactors. In terms of the South Korean nuclear personnel and infrastructure, policymakers will, now I'm not sure, perhaps our Korean colleagues can explain this to me and give me more insight here, but they would need to figure out how not only to phase out the nuclear facilities, but also to phase out and redirect its nuclear personnel to other jobs at that point, perhaps 60 years later. And of course, we do have a long lead time right now. And of course, at that point, perhaps the students might realize that nuclear is not the future to be in. But I think it might help for us to, including myself, admittedly, I still have to study up on this too, to study the German case and to see how they've gone through their redirection or phase out personnel plans as well. Perhaps we'll see some South Korean engineers and scientists and experts wanting to rush over and go over to international organizations. Perhaps the IAEA can absorb, the understaffed IAEA can absorb some of these experts. However, we'll have to figure out some budgetary ways to fulfill budgetary constraints that the IAEA has. In terms of South Korea's ventures overseas, how does this affect its exports? I mentioned a bit before, I suspect so far with its UAE deal, they might be safe for a while. The question would really be 60 years later, or when the UAE's nuclear power plants are ready to be decommissioned and go offline, will there still be South Korean personnel and experts to help them do that? I just don't know. Saudi Arabian business, it might be safe. Perhaps Dr. E might be more knowledgeable here, but with the smart reactor deal, that portfolio might be safe even with this phase out. But one question that I have in mind is prospects for nuclear cooperation with Iran. Because during the former Park Geun-hye administration, Iran had voiced an interest to import South Korean nuclear power plants and have South Korea be one of its major nuclear suppliers. And that's something that the former Park Geun-hye administration was interested in as well. But this phase out, if again politically sustainable, it would, in my mind, it would definitely affect the prospects for that business portfolio. A nuclear phase out here in South Korea would also impact South Korea and the U.S.'s joint cooperation in third countries, both on the nuclear energy facilities side, but also on maintaining non-proliferation standards globally. And in a bit of a shameless self-promotion here, I co-wrote a Brookings report with Fred McGoldrick and Bob Einhorn, thanks to the generous support of KAIST in 2016, January 2016. And we wrote a report on how the US and South Korea can join hands and cooperate in third countries on the nuclear energy front. And it's a very lengthy report, but our main message really was that the allies are uniquely positioned to really do some good in the nuclear energy market and also the global non-proliferation regime. And the basic message that we were sending out was that the relative strengths of one country may compensate the weakness of the other. So for example, South Korean strengths in manufacturing capabilities in construction and operation and maintenance, coupled with American strengths in nuclear safety, in advanced reactor designs and provision of high-precision products, also combined with their joint high-standard nuclear non-proliferation, nuclear safety, nuclear security standards for customers, this is definitely something that would be a good thing and attractive and a smart thing to do. But if South Korea retreats from its role, the global nonproliferation regime would also be heavily impacted. Now, the question for nonproliferation implications really, I think the biggest question would be on new countries and how many power plants we expect in new countries. Because we still have a lot of existing nuclear power plants built by the US, France, Korea, and Japan that exist. But in general, it would be harder for the US to so-called police with South Korea in terms of global nonproliferation, in terms of maintaining high nuclear safety, nuclear security standards. And even without South Korea, Washington still has the responsibility and obligation to continue to tell Russia and China that it's also in Chinese and Russian interests to require these high standards from its customers. Because a nuclear accident anywhere really is an accident everywhere, and also nuclear security incidents anywhere is an incident everywhere. And finally, any implications regarding the North Korean issue and for Korean reunification, it really depends on timing, method, and objective. When reunification happens, along the timetable of South Korea's domestic nuclear phase-out, and what South Korean objectives are. Until the present day, we hear a lot of desires from many circles in the South Korean community to want to retain a latent nuclear capability with its nuclear energy technology. And so the question remains, what happens to that? There are also strong voices that whether there's a collapse in North Korea or whether there's reunification, that South Korea would also like to be on the front lines of securing North Korea's nuclear weapons, together with the US and the other P5, or perhaps some South Koreans don't want the other P5 there, but with the US, and also be on the front lines dismantling North Korea's nuclear facilities and withdrawing them. So that would also be a question for South Korean policymakers to consider, and not only in terms of redirection in terms of South Korean nuclear personnel, but also at that point, whether it's a CTR type method with North Korea or not, how to redirect and who's going to train to redirect North Korean nuclear personnel if and when the time comes. So this brings me to conclude a general question, a broader question for Korean policymakers is, based on everything that I have discussed, implications for the global nuclear energy market, implications for Korea's competitiveness in the global market, and also implications for global nonproliferation, nuclear safety and security. The question really is, for South Korean policymakers, is a complete phase-out the way to go, or could there be an opportunity to perhaps scale it down to appropriate levels, and we'll have to define what appropriate numbers are in terms of nuclear power plants, but combine that with, of course, a high level of dependence on renewables, to of course, to meet South Korea's energy security demands, because of course that's actually the #1 concern here in South Korea, is to meet its energy demands here in the South. So with that, I leave it to you, Scott, and discussion.
Thank you very much. Dr. Lee and Ms. Kim chose to talk on the nuclear power side of the issue, and Dr. Cheon and Dr. Cho chose to talk about the non-proliferation nuclear weapons question for South Korea. And I wanted to pose a first question to the group to see whether you can make linkages between the two topics. It seems to me, first, I would want to know whether it makes any difference whether South Korea continued its nuclear power program on its ability to acquire nuclear weapons in the future, or whether you would use reprocess fuel that's already in spent fuel ponds or other processes to acquire nuclear weapons. So it doesn't make a difference about whether you went forward with nuclear power or ended it, whether you could acquire nuclear weapons in the near term. And secondly, for Dr. Cho and Dr. Joe, if you withdrew from the NPT, that would, I assume, end U.S. nuclear cooperation with South Korea and would make you a pariah unable to export nuclear power plants, except for maybe some other non-nuclear, other non-NPT members. So it would be a radical shift in your defense policy, which would have an impact on your export policy. What are the linkages and how should we think about them? Because these are two different topics, but they're related in an interesting, complex way. I don't know who would want to begin?
Actually, I don't think there are any links. Rather, North Korea and South Korea is two extreme sides. The South Korea for the peaceful use only, and North Korea for the military application only.
Right.
So I don't think any linkage there.
Well, my question is, how quickly could South Korea acquire nuclear weapons, and would it make a difference whether it had an active program, or does it have enough materials today that even if you got rid of the program in 5 years, you could move forward with nuclear weapons very quickly?
As far as you know, the current Korean government has no intention to have nuclear weapons. So probably the nuclear phase-out may be consistent with current government policy.
Right.
But I'm not sure whether this current policy is consistent with the majority Koreans' understanding. Probably the majority Koreans may prefer some ambiguity. So try to maintain nuclear capability, some contingency plan. It is my understanding. So probably the most Koreans want to maintain, want to have nuclear plants, power plants, maybe some containment, but at least not phase out. It is my understanding.
Yeah, I think, more specifically to your question, I think it would depend on how the phase-out deals with spent fuel in South Korea. And perhaps our Korean colleagues could touch upon that and what those concrete details are. Because if, like you're implying, if there's enough fissile material still in South Korea, then of course that does provide a route towards weaponization. But touching upon Professor Cho's comment, yes, I don't want to, this is not mainstream and I don't want to overgeneralize, but I hinted at it in my presentation, that there are circles in South Korea that are comfortable with having nuclear power because it provides a latent capability. And they can look over at Japan as well. And because Japan's nuclear programs, and especially because it has the anarchic capability, gives them that latent capability. So I think, now again, I don't want to say that this is widespread, but I think it would be reassuring to some circles and some thinkers, and a bit of anxiety for them if the Moon administration and future South Korean administrations actually follow through with this complete phase-out.
Maybe there is some. I think as I said, the withdrawal from the NPT and go for nuclear is our last option. It's going to be a very difficult decision. We have to run the risk of all these difficulties and sanctions, pressures, criticisms from the international community. We have to willing to accept those the risks. But as I said, if there is no other option except that in order to defend our national security, and we have to be willing to take all the risks. And I'm not sure whether, I hope, even if we temporarily withdraw from the NPT, I hope that still we will be able to use peaceful use of nuclear energy. And I'm not sure whether we have to use these spent fuels to develop nuclear weapons.
How else would you do it?
There might be. I mean, this is a technical issue, and I'm not pressed to to say anything detail about technicalities, but I think there are several options that we can pursue if we decide to go for nuclear. And we, just relying on spent fuel is the very old technology in the 1970s and the 60s. So science is advances, I think we have more options if we choose to do.
Yeah, good. I'm glad we got some connections between the two comments made here. Let's open it up. If you can identify yourself and ask a question either to the whole group or to a particular individual, would be great. Please.
My name is Mason Lee. I'm from KAIST, Science and Technology Policy School, and I'm a PhD degree student. I have a comment to Professor Sagan's question. So in 1970s, as far as I know, South Korea pursued the nuclear development, nuclear weapons development, but it failed because South Korea didn't have enough fissile materials, and it also failed to import fissile material from France, as far as I know. And probably it will happen again if South Korea decided to go nuclear in the future. But more important problem is that getting fissile material is the second problem. The first problem is whether or not going nuclear or not. So I think South Korea's decision to go nuclear is very possible because according to Sagan's book, for instance, India's case, Pakistan's case, if the public want to go nuclear, politicians must react to the public's need and their movement. France decided to go nuclear based on to improve their national grandeur. So I think before thinking of the whether or not South Korea could go to a nuclear state, we should first investigate the public need, and second, we can think about the nuclear sharing program with the United States, like NATO's nuclear sharing program. So I want to ask to professors, how do you think about the nuclear sharing program before getting out of the NPT? Thank you.
Yeah, I think you could both comment on stationing of weapons or flybys of B-52 stationing at Guam. There are different things short of acquiring nuclear weapons that might be possible.
Yeah, these are true, of course, I said, but recently there was a B-1B bomber frequently fly over Korean Peninsula whenever there's no provocation. But as I understand, B-1B bomber is not nuclear capable. It's just a conventional weapons only. So in terms of enhanced nuclear extended deterrence, I don't understand how much effective those B-1B bombers are on the Korean Peninsula. And regarding your question about nuclear sharing, when I proposed the reintroduction of tactical nuclear weapons to the Korean Peninsula, the naturally following step would be very close-knit nuclear sharing mechanism established between Washington and Seoul in order to share the nuclear assets in the Korean Peninsula together, and all this necessary military preparation for use in case of we have to do. Okay? That is I think very important, very visible nuclear deterrence against North Korea. And then if, as I said, if America refuses to, our demand, again, our last option has to be go on our own. Running the risk of all these difficulties in the future.
Okay, I'd like to mention 2 points. The first one is the survey outcome. So if you check the survey outcome, majority Koreans favor nuclearization. And it's true. But the problem is the majority Koreans want nuclear weapons, but this option is not acceptable to opinion leaders or policymakers. So we have some discrepancy between mass thinking and the opinion leaders' decision-making process. The second point, the nuclear sharing, it will marginally increase the credibility of the U.S. extended deterrence. But as far as I'm concerned, as far as we have U.S. presence in this Korean Peninsula, United States never accept this idea, automatic triggering, the tripwire. So as long as there are American soldiers, large American soldiers in this Korean Peninsula, well, the credibility of the extended deterrence is secured. There is no more credible than the presence of US soldiers as to triggering, to initiating extended deterrence. This is my understanding.
On the first point in question, yes, I agree with Professor Cho that there is a gap between public perception and the thinking and belief of South Korean leaders and decision makers. A caveat here in terms of public perception really is these opinion polls typically are conducted right after North Korean provocations. And so of course, if you do that, of course any South Korean on the street will say, yes, we need nuclear weapons too to defend ourselves. So there is a bit of bias and it's a bit skewed there sometimes. But what's actually personally reassuring for me is that, as Professor Cho said, South Korean decision makers and leaders understand very well what the consequences are if South Korea did withdraw from the NPT to weaponize. And again, I'm not trying to promote at all, but Bob Einhorn and I did a very extensive study last year. We published in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists on this very topic. And we did this during the conservative Park Geun-hye administration, during which we heard the loudest voices for nuclear weaponization. And we did extensive interviews with leaders of all sectors, the executive branch, the National Assembly, the expert community, defense, the military, even the business community, and academics, and even the media. And the common conclusion that everybody had was actually what Dr. Cheon is stressing is either very, very, very last resort or no option at all. And so I think that's quite reassuring. To your second question about nuclear sharing and NATO, I think we need to be careful when raising this point because my sense, based on my research and my extensive interviews in Korea, I sense that when South Koreans hear the word or think of the concept of nuclear sharing in NATO, it sounds more extravagant than it actually really is. It's not like NATO member states have the button on top of the American button for launching nuclear weapons. That's not the case at all. And so my sense is that I think the South Korean government, which is a very important study to do, is to think about what it wants to ask for and to actually study the NATO nuclear sharing arrangement first and then come up with a unified ask list. Because my sense is that there is no united consensus on what South Koreans want that is similar to what NATO has.
As a man working at a nuclear research institute, I feel a little uncomfortable for talking about nuclear options. As I know, I think the Korean government never thought of any nuclear option. I never heard of that.
Not since the 1970s. Not since the 1970s.
I'm not.
There are questions about the 80s.
Yeah.
There's no question about the 70s.
And currently, I never heard of that from the government. So I think Dr. John's talk is he said the last. It's the last option. I think there are many other options before that.
Another question from the audience, in the very far back.
Thank you. I have two questions, one for Dr. Kwang-Seok and one for Professor Seong-Whun. For Dr. Kwang-Seok, given the phasing out policy of the Moon Jae-in administration, what will be the future of the reprocessing, the pyroprocessing project of the Kerry, and the future of the South Korea and US cooperation in safeguard verification for the pyroprocessing technology? And for Professor Seong-Whun, as Ms. Duyeon Kim mentioned, the phasing out policy in South Korea will be a bad thing for the non-proliferation regime. What's your opinion about that? Thank you.
I just talk about the nuclear phase-out scenario here, and still, I think some pilot processing R&D work will be continue. I mean, for the the spent fuel management in Korea, and also the joint fuel cycle study will continue until 2020. So we will see. I mean, and I am not sure whether the current administration is going to be on the R&D work, but I'm sure that that work will be continued.
My own personal view is that when we discussed this a bit with Dr. Cheon's paper earlier today, is that the phase out of the South Korean nuclear program would invariably reduce South Korea's export policy as well. If that's the case, you have both the United States and South Korea moving out of the export business, or at least not playing as prominent a role. And invariably, you're going to get China and Russia to play an even more active role, maybe India being the third state. The French, we don't know what they're doing with their program. That's going to end up, I think, damaging the efforts to have constraints on new countries acquiring nuclear power. Now, you're already seeing that because the United States in the negotiations with Vietnam backed away from the efforts to put pressure with respect to the so-called gold standard because the Russians were undercutting it and were giving a better deal. You're just going to see more and more of that as democratic countries concerned about non-proliferation